I thought bringing Rex home would fix everything. My partner, my friend, the one who saved my life more times than I can count. But he doesn't even recognize me anymore. He's broken just like me, and I don't know if we can find our way back to each other. But I owe it to him, to us, to try. Because some bonds are worth fighting for. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. I hadn't been home long, just a few weeks since I returned from the army, but it felt like a lifetime. My mind still wandered back to the desert, to the screams, to the places I couldn't shake off. The nightmares didn't stop, not even here, in the quiet of my small house in a sleepy town. But this time, I had a plan. A simple one, but it felt like the only way to reclaim something.
Rex.
I stood outside the shelter, my hands sweaty against the worn fabric of my jacket. They'd said Rex was here, but I wasn't sure what to expect. When I'd left, we were brothers, bound by the bond of war. He was my dog, my partner. Now, I wasn't sure if I was looking at a stranger, or the dog I once knew. My pulse quickened. If he didn't remember me, if he didn't want me, what would I do? Hey there. The shelter worker's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I nodded. I'm here to see Rex. She led me down a long, sterile hallway, her shoes tapping lightly against the concrete floor. The sound seemed too loud, echoing against the cold walls. Each step felt like a reminder of the distance between who I was and who I used to be, before the war, before the scars. At the end of the hallway, she opened a door, and there he was.
Rex.
The same dark brown eyes, the same rough coat. But his posture was different. He didn't recognize me. His ears didn't perk up, his tail didn't wag. I called his name softly, trying to force a smile. Rex? It's me, buddy. It's Jack. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, he lowered his head and took a step back, his eyes never leaving mine. A weight settled in my chest. The bond that we'd shared in the heat of battle, the connection that had kept me going through some of the hardest days of my life. It wasn't there. Not anymore. I felt like a fool. I had hoped for a warm greeting, a wag of the tail. Something that would tell me that Rex remembered me. But there was nothing. The worker was looking at me with a gentle expression. He's been through a lot, you know. They told me he had some issues when he first arrived. Might take time for him to adjust. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what he's been through. She stepped back, leaving me alone with Rex in the small room. I tried to approach, but he growled softly, stepping back further, almost as if he wanted to run away. My heart cracked. I've lost him. I'd always believed that the bond between us could never be broken, that we would always have each other. But here I was, standing in front of a dog who didn't even recognize me. I wasn't sure if I could do this. Rex, I whispered, my voice tight, I need you to remember. We were partners. We survived together. But Rex didn't respond. He turned his back on me and lay down in the farthest corner of the room, facing away. The ache in my chest deepened. This was harder than I thought. Maybe I was kidding myself. Maybe the bond was just another casualty of war. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dog who once shared every moment of my life, my heart racing with a mix of frustration, sadness, and a faint flicker of hope. I wasn't ready to give up on him. Not yet. The first few days after I brought Rex home were a blur of uncertainty. I'd expected some resistance, sure. I knew he'd been through his own version of hell. His time away from me was just as painful as mine away from him. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold indifference he showed. At first, Rex wouldn't even look at me. He spent the majority of the time curled up in the corner of the living room, his back to me. Every time I approached him, he either growled softly or cowered, as if I were the enemy. I tried everything. I'd sit across from him, offering a treat, coaxing him with gentle words.
Small, Rex.
Remember me? We used to work together. I'm Jack, your partner.
He didn't respond.
The silence between us felt like a vast, empty space. Every day, I hoped for even the slightest acknowledgement, just a tail wag, a glance in my direction, but there was nothing. I tried to push through, determined to make it work. I would take him outside for walks, but Rex barely showed any interest in the world around him. He dragged his feet, his head low, like a shadow of the dog I once knew. The playful spark that used to light his eyes was gone. He just trudged along, as if he were carrying the weight of the world. I watched him carefully, studying his behavior, trying to piece together what was wrong. There were moments when his eyes would dart nervously at the smallest noises. A car honking down the street would make him flinch. A door creaking shut would have him backing away as if ready to run. It wasn't just me he didn't trust. It was the world. It made sense. I'd seen enough of it in the service. Post-traumatic stress. For Rex, it had been a constant barrage of chaos, of war. And I had no idea what kind of trauma he'd experienced after we were separated. What I did know was that this wasn't going to be easy. Rex wasn't just scared of me. He was scared of everything. I took him to the backyard one afternoon, determined to try again. I crouched down in front of him, holding out a treat.
Hey, Rex.
It's just me. We've got this, okay? For a second, I thought he might do it. His ears twitched, and his nose sniffed the air. But then his body stiffened, and he slowly backed away, eyes fixed on me like I was a stranger. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. This wasn't the way I'd imagined it. I had expected the dog I knew, the dog who used to follow me everywhere, who would always be there by my side.
But now?
I didn't know who this animal was or how to fix it. Later that night, I tried again, sitting beside him on the couch, gently petting his back. But Rex tensed up at my touch, and I felt the weight of his resistance in every inch of his body. He wanted nothing to do with me. I sighed, feeling a deep frustration begin to settle in. Was this really going to work? Could I repair this broken bond? I had no idea. I'd seen men and women fall apart after war, seen them spiral into darkness, consumed by things they couldn't control. I didn't want to let Rex slip away into that same abyss. But it wasn't just about him, this was me too. I was looking for something to hold on to, a purpose to rebuild my life, and Rex was my last shot. As the days went on, I kept trying. Small steps. No pressure. I took him out for longer walks. I began talking to him more, trying to make him understand that I wasn't the enemy. Sometimes, when I sat in the living room with him, I'd just talk about the things we used to do together. How we'd patrol the perimeter, how I'd call him by name when I needed him to stay alert. Maybe, just maybe, those memories would surface for him, like they did for me in flashes. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching Rex stare out across the yard. I reached for the treat pouch on my belt and tried again. Come on, Rex. You used to love these. He didn't even look at the treat. Instead, his eyes shifted nervously to the trees in the distance. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but the wind blowing through the branches. But for Rex, it wasn't just the trees. Everything around him seemed to threaten him, from the smallest noise to the slightest movement. I put the treat in my hand and held it closer, just a few inches from his face. Rex, please. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the tiniest glimmer of recognition in his eyes. His nose twitched, and he shifted his stance slightly, inching closer. I held my breath, my heart pounding. This was it, his first sign of trust. But just as quickly as it came, the moment passed. Rex took a step back again, retreating to his corner of the yard. I slumped forward, my hand still outstretched, the treat slowly falling to the ground. Was this hopeless? No, I couldn't give up on him. Not yet. We were both broken, but maybe that was the starting point. Maybe the way forward was slow. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my hands. Tomorrow would be a new day. Another chance to try again. We weren't there yet, but we would be. A week had passed since that first failed attempt at getting Rex to remember me. I was still battling with my own emotions, trying to push through the frustration that had been eating at me. How could I have imagined this would be easy? The dog I used to call my partner was now a shadow, a distant memory. Every time I tried to reach out, He pulled further away, like I was a ghost in his world. But something changed one evening. It was the simplest thing, a moment that would seem insignificant to anyone else, but to me, it felt like a sign. Rex had been pacing around the backyard, as usual, circling the same spots like he was searching for something. He barely acknowledged me. I had learned to give him space, hoping that somehow, in his own time, he'd remember. That night, the air had a strange heaviness to it. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard. I sat on the porch, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against me. I tried to read, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was Rex. Every day I hoped, but hope was wearing thin. Why wouldn't he let me in? I was lost in my thoughts when I heard it, a soft whine. It was so quiet at first, almost a murmur, but it pulled me from my reverie. I looked up. Rex was standing at the far side of the yard, staring at me. His body was rigid, his eyes wide, fixed on me in a way that I hadn't seen before. For the first time, he was aware of me in the moment, not as a stranger, but as someone he was considering. My heart skipped. I held my breath, not wanting to scare him away. I had no idea what was happening, but I couldn't ignore it. I slowly got up from the porch and took a step toward him, my movements slow and deliberate, like I was dealing with a wild animal. "Rex," I called softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to scare him off, but I had to try. He tilted his head, his eyes following me as I moved closer. I took another step. His tail twitched, but he didn't back away this time. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a treat. I held it out in front of me, keeping my distance. "Come on, boy. You remember these, don't you?" Rex took a hesitant step forward. His nose twitched, and for a brief moment, I thought he was going to turn and run again. But instead, he took another step, closing the gap between us. He was moving slower than I had ever seen him move, as if he were trying to convince himself that it was okay, that I wasn't a threat. When he finally reached me, I could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air. His eyes never left me as he sniffed the treat in my hand. I held it steady, waiting for him to make the next move. He reached forward, slowly, and took the treat from my hand. The contact felt like a small victory. I held back a smile, my chest swelling with a mix of relief and hope. This was a breakthrough. For a few seconds, Rex stood there, chewing the treat, his eyes still locked onto mine. He didn't run away. He didn't flinch. I could see something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, maybe. The wall that had been built up between us felt just a little bit thinner. "Good boy," I whispered, almost instinctively. And for the first time since I'd brought him home, Rex's tail moved. It wasn't a full wag, but it was something. A tiny gesture, a tiny step in the right direction. I took another deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders just a little. Maybe this was just the start, but it felt like progress. Rex had taken the first step toward trusting me again. And I could see in his eyes that he was starting to let me in, just a little bit. The next few days were a mix of small victories and setbacks. Every time Rex showed me a little bit of trust, I felt like I was walking on air. But I had to be careful not to push him too hard. He was still fragile, still haunted by the things I couldn't understand. So I continued with the small, consistent efforts. I would sit with him, talk to him, and offer him treats, never rushing him. It was about patience, trust, and time. It wasn't a quick fix, and it wasn't going to be easy, but we had to rebuild from the ground up. One morning, I took Rex out for a walk just down the street. He was still hesitant, but he seemed to be more alert, more engaged than before. As we walked, I noticed how he kept looking around, his head darting back and forth, like he was scanning for danger. It wasn't like the Rex I remembered, the confident, alert dog who was always a step ahead of me. But it was progress. And then something unexpected happened. As we reached the corner of the street, a car came around, and the noise startled Rex. He froze, his body stiffening. His ears flattened, and he looked at me, wide-eyed, like he was about to bolt. I stopped immediately, kneeling down beside him. "Hey, it's okay, Rex. I've got you. You're safe." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. I reached out, and gently placed my hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. I wasn't just telling him it was okay. I had to show him. We stood there for a moment, just the two of us in silence. Slowly, Rex relaxed. He let out a deep sigh, and his body softened under my touch. The moment felt like a tiny miracle, one I wasn't sure I deserved, but one I was grateful for nonetheless. The walk continued without incident, and when we got back to the house, Rex didn't head straight for his corner. He stayed close to me, walking alongside me, as if something had shifted. I felt like I was finally starting to get through to him. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. And I knew that whatever came next, we were going to face it together. We weren't healed yet, but this was the first real breakthrough. And I wasn't going to stop now. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for Rex to take a step forward in his healing process. It wasn't a giant leap, but it felt monumental to me. His eyes had softened. The defensiveness that had once guarded them had begun to dissipate. Every morning he greeted me with just a little more warmth, a little more trust. But deep down, I knew we were still fragile, still balancing on the edge. One wrong move could shatter everything. I didn't know it then, but that day would be the one to test everything. It started innocently enough. It was one of those mornings where the world felt calm, where the sunlight filtered through the curtains in soft, lazy rays, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. Rex had eaten his breakfast, and after that, we headed outside, as usual, for our daily walk. The first few minutes were the same as always. We walked down the street, me talking to him softly, coaxing him through each step. He was still a little hesitant when other people passed by, but he didn't shy away from me. I kept a tight hold on the leash, knowing that his nervousness was still there beneath the surface. He was getting better, but he wasn't fully there yet. Then came the moment that set everything off. As we turned the corner, heading toward the park, I heard the screech of tires. It was a sound I had heard thousands of times in my military career, the sound of something going wrong fast. I didn't have time to react, to process. In an instant, I saw the black SUV barrel toward us, too fast, too close. My heart skipped a beat. "Rex," I shouted. But it was too late. The vehicle swerved, sending up a spray of gravel, and before I could even think about pulling Rex back, he lunged. It was as if his instincts kicked in, or maybe it was just pure terror. He bolted away from me, running across the street in the blink of an eye, disappearing behind a nearby building. My stomach dropped.
No. No, no, no.
I stood frozen for a split second, my mind scrambling to catch up with what had just happened. The SUV didn't stop. But my focus wasn't on the car anymore, it was on Rex. "Rex," I shouted again, voice cracking. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted after him, my feet pounding the pavement. He was too fast, too frantic. I had no idea where he was going, no idea if he was even hearing me anymore. The world felt like it had gone dark. My head spun with worry, a fog of panic setting in as I ran faster, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I rounded the corner where I'd last seen him. Nothing. My stomach twisted into a knot. Where the hell did he go? I called again, louder this time, but only the sound of my own voice returned. The street was eerily quiet, as if the world had held its breath, waiting for me to find him. I pushed forward, cutting through alleyways, scanning every shadow, every corner. It felt like I was running on adrenaline alone, my chest tight with fear. It wasn't like Rex to just disappear like this. He wasn't a runaway dog. He was my partner, my friend. And he was out there, terrified and alone. I had to find him. My legs were burning, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. It wasn't long before I heard it, the softest whimper. My heart stopped for a moment, and I froze. There, behind a dumpster, just barely visible, was Rex. His body was crouched low, his fur matted with dirt, and his eyes wide with fear. I knelt down slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Rex, come here, boy." He didn't move. I reached out my hand, knowing that if I made any sudden moves, it would only make things worse. I needed him to trust me, to believe that I wasn't a threat. But all I could see in his eyes was that same terror. For a moment, I thought he might run again. But then, slowly, hesitantly, he took a small step toward me. I held my breath. This was it, the moment that would make or break us. "Come on, boy," I said, my voice trembling. "I've got you." It felt like an eternity, but finally, Rex approached me, his body trembling, his tail low. I didn't force him to come closer, just let him make the decision himself. He moved the last few inches and finally, I was able to reach out and touch his head. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my hand stroking his fur as I whispered to him, trying to soothe the panic out of his body. We were safe. But the silence between us felt heavy. What had just happened? Why had he run like that? I sat with Rex for a long time, just letting him rest beside me. I didn't rush him. After a while, I stood up, and this time, when I called his name, he followed me without hesitation. We made our way home in silence. The walk had been a test of everything, of trust, of patience, and of fear. It was clear now, Rex's trauma ran deeper than I had understood. The world still held too many triggers for him, too many dangers that only he could sense. I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how long it would take to heal the wounds of his past. But I did know one thing. Rex needed me and I needed him. And we had to work through this together, no matter how long it took. When we got home, I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking down at him. Rex sat at my feet, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of exhaustion and uncertainty. We'd made it through this. But we still had a long road ahead of us. And this was just the beginning. The days following the incident with the car were tense. It wasn't just about Rex being scared anymore. Something inside me had shifted. The fear of losing him again, the realization that the bond we were trying to rebuild was fragile, gnawed at me. But I kept going. I couldn't let the fear take over. I couldn't let Rex see that I was breaking down, too. Not when he needed me the most. That night, after the walk, Rex had seemed different. He'd curled up on the couch, resting his head on my lap, but his eyes were far away. I knew he was trying to process what had happened, just as I was. But he had no words for it. And neither did I. I sat there, stroking his fur absent-mindedly, letting the silence stretch between us. My thoughts were a whirlpool of doubt and uncertainty. What had I done wrong? Why had he panicked? Was it the car? Was it something I didn't see, something I couldn't protect him from? The truth was, I didn't have any answers. I didn't know how to make it better. The more I thought about it, the more the weight of it crushed me. Every time I looked at Rex, I saw a shadow of the dog he used to be, the confident, happy companion who had always been by my side, no matter what. And now, he was this fractured shell, a ghost of the dog I had known. I ran my hand through my hair, frustration bubbling up again. How much longer? How much more could I take? The weight of the situation was suffocating. I had been trying so hard to be strong for Rex, to give him the stability he needed, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the act. I wasn't fine. I wasn't okay. Just then, Rex stirred, his eyes flicking toward me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. He was alert, waiting for my next move, trying to gauge if I was okay. He was still scared, but he was also trying to connect with me. His eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once been full of life, were now filled with so much more, confusion, anxiety, and fear. I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. I was so close to breaking down. My mind raced, but my body stayed still, frozen in place. I had to stay strong for him. But what was the point? The weight of the world was crushing me, and I wasn't sure I could carry it anymore. My thoughts were so loud, echoing in my head, asking questions I didn't have answers to. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. The silence stretched on until I finally spoke. "I don't know how to fix this, buddy," I muttered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to make it right. I'm trying, but I don't know how." Rex's ears twitched at the sound of my voice, but he didn't move. He just sat there, his body tense, still waiting for me. I could feel his eyes on me, his silent way of saying, "I need you to lead me through this, Jack." The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was, a man who had been through the worst of the worst: combat, loss, betrayal, loneliness, and yet this was what was breaking me.
This.
Trying to get my dog back. The one thing that should have been easy, that should have been natural, and yet here I was lost. How could I fix this? How could I fix him? But maybe, just maybe, I had it wrong. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fix him. Maybe I wasn't supposed to have all the answers. Maybe what he needed from me wasn't strength or a plan or a solution. Maybe what he needed was just me. I realized in that moment that I was looking for something external to change, something out of my control. I was hoping that Rex's memories would come back all at once, that the bond we once had would be restored in an instant. But it didn't work like that. It couldn't. Healing wasn't a quick fix. I blinked back the tears that were threatening to spill. I had to let go of that. I had to let go of the idea that I could just fix it all with a single gesture or moment. It would take time. It would take patience. And it would take me understanding that Rex, too, was going through something I couldn't completely understand. My chest clenched, and I buried my face in my hands for a moment, trying to pull myself together. When I looked back at him, he was still watching me, waiting. It wasn't pity in his eyes. It was a strange understanding, a quiet communication between us that said, "I don't have the answers either, but I'm here, and that's enough." I let out a shaky breath, my hand reaching out to stroke his head. "We're gonna get through this, buddy," I whispered, my voice steadying, though my heart was still heavy. "We're gonna take it one day at a time, and we're gonna figure it out. Together." And in that moment, something shifted again. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't a moment of dramatic change. But it was a quiet, subtle moment of understanding. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to fix it all. I just had to be there, for him and for myself. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to accept, that maybe, sometimes, healing didn't look like an immediate fix. It looked like sitting in the pain together, letting the silence speak for itself, and being there, even when it felt like the road was endless. Rex rested his head on my lap, his body finally relaxing just a little. I stayed there, holding him, letting the calm settle between us. Maybe this wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a step forward. One small step. And that was enough. I thought we were making progress. I really did. But the truth was, every time I let myself believe that Rex was going to be okay, that he'd fully trust me again, reality had a way of slapping me back into the present. I should have known better than to think the path to recovery was a straight line. It happened 2 days after our moment on the couch. I had taken him for a walk early in the morning, when the streets were still quiet, the sun only just starting to rise over the horizon. Rex was walking beside me, his pace slower than usual, but steady. The morning air had that crisp bite to it, a reminder that winter was just around the corner, and it made everything feel more fragile. I should have seen it coming, but I was too focused on the simplicity of the walk to notice the tension building in Rex's shoulders. We turned the corner onto the main street when it hit, another flash of headlights. Another car coming at us too quickly. Before I could even process it, Rex froze. His body went stiff, every muscle locking in place. His ears flattened, and his tail tucked under. I saw the fear flood his eyes before he bolted. There was no hesitation this time. No time for me to call his name, no moment to reassure him. He was already running. "Rex," I shouted, panic rising in my chest as I yanked on the leash. But it was too late, he was gone. My heart pounded as I ran after him, my mind reeling. It wasn't the car itself that had triggered him this time. I had learned by now that the problem wasn't just the cars, it was something deeper. Something in his past that I couldn't reach. I wasn't sure if it was the sound of the tires screeching, the way the car came at us too fast, or the memory of some other traumatic event. But Rex had snapped. The leash slipped from my hand as he tore down the street, and I stood there for a split second, watching him disappear into the distance. My throat tightened. Not again. I was paralyzed for a moment, fear and frustration bubbling up, making it hard to think.
He had made so much progress. We had made so much progress.
And now it felt like it had all been erased. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and I started running, pushing through the panic that clawed at my chest. I can't lose him. I can't lose him again. The streets were empty, too empty. It was as if the world had gone on mute, the only sound the pounding of my feet against the concrete and my ragged breaths. My hands were shaking. I couldn't let Rex slip away again. I had to get him back. I rounded the corner, and there he was. Not far away, but far enough that I felt like my heart had stopped. He had stopped running, but he was still pacing, darting between parked cars like a wild animal, unsure of what to do next. His body was trembling, eyes wide with fear. He was trapped in the chaos of his own mind, lost to whatever memory had resurfaced. Rex. I called, my voice louder now, desperation creeping in. He froze, ears twitching at the sound of my voice, but it wasn't enough to calm him. He just stood there, watching me with wide, fearful eyes like he didn't know who I was. I took a step closer, slowly, trying to give him space, but my own panic was bubbling over. I don't know what to do. I felt the tightness in my chest again, the weight of helplessness crushing me. The longer I stood there, the more it seemed like Rex was slipping further and further away, back into that place of fear, back into a place where I couldn't reach him. I took another step forward, carefully, slowly, my voice quiet. Rex, it's okay. I've got you. Come here, boy. But he didn't move. He was still frozen, staring at me like he didn't understand. I swallowed hard, stepping closer until I was just a few feet away. Please, Rex, please come back to me. For a moment, it felt like the world held its breath. Rex's eyes flicked to the side, and for a split second, it looked like he was going to bolt again. But then, slowly, he moved. It wasn't much, a small step, hesitant, as though he was testing the ground beneath him. His body was still tense, but I saw the tiniest glimmer of recognition in his eyes. I didn't dare breathe, not yet. I knelt down, keeping my voice low and calm. Come on, Rex, just a little closer. Another step, then another. And then, finally, with the slowest, most cautious movement, Rex came to me, his body trembling but trusting me enough to take that final step. I reached out, gently placing a hand on his head. He flinched slightly, but he didn't pull away. I ran my fingers through his fur, trying to reassure him, to show him that I wasn't going to hurt him, that he was safe. But deep down, I knew that this was just another small victory in a battle that wasn't over yet. Rex wasn't just dealing with the fear of the cars or the sound of the tire screeching. There were deeper scars there, scars that weren't going to heal with a single moment of calm. I didn't know what those scars were, but I knew they were there. I had a choice now. Pull him back and try to comfort him, or take him home and let him process it all in his own time. I chose the latter. Slowly, carefully, I stood up, guiding him back toward home. The walk back was quieter, though the tension between us still lingered. Rex stayed close to me, but I could tell that we hadn't finished this. We hadn't finished the work we needed to do to rebuild the trust that had been shattered so many times. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew this. We were back at square one. We had just taken another step backwards. And I had no idea how many more setbacks we'd face before we finally found our way through this mess of fear, trauma, and healing. I didn't have the answers, but I was learning something new every day. Maybe the real key was just never giving up, never letting go. I didn't have a choice. Rex needed me, and I wasn't going anywhere. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that gnawed at the edges of your mind, making you question everything. Rex seemed to retreat even further inside himself. He wasn't responding to me the way he used to. There was a distance between us, and it felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. I had thought that maybe after that last scare, he would calm down, but now it seemed like we had hit another wall. Every morning, I took him out for walks. I tried to engage him with toys, even tried a few new commands, but his eyes, those damn eyes, kept looking past me, almost as if he was waiting for something to happen. As if he knew that everything was fragile and anything could set him off. I try not to show my frustration, but inside, I was struggling. I had spent so much time being angry at myself, wondering where I went wrong, but now, more than ever, the anger turned inward. I was starting to wonder if I could actually help him. What if I couldn't? What if this was my fault? I should have never adopted him, never brought him home, if I couldn't give him what he needed. "Come on, Rex," I said softly, reaching out to him as he lay on the rug in the living room. His eyes flickered up at me, but he didn't move. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm losing him, I thought. He's not the same dog. I'm not the same person. It was like I was stuck, trapped in this cycle of guilt and helplessness. Rex was still here, but the dog I knew, the dog that would come bounding over to me, tail wagging, eyes bright with excitement, was gone. And I couldn't find a way to bring him back. I watched as he lowered his head back down to the rug, closing his eyes. He was tired, or maybe just drained. I couldn't tell. I had hoped, after we made it through that last walk, that something had changed. But now, I wasn't so sure. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I can't give up on him.
Not now.
The thought of giving up never truly crossed my mind. It was more the doubt creeping in, the fear that I was failing him, that I wasn't the right person for him. I had done so many things wrong in my life, hurt so many people, and now I was afraid I was doing the same with Rex. But I couldn't let that fear control me. But the air felt thick with anticipation, like the world was holding its breath. Maybe Rex could sense it too. I walked over to him slowly, kneeling down next to where he was resting. He lifted his head at the sound of my movement, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You ready to go out, boy?" I whispered, my voice soft but firm. "We'll take it easy today. No rush." He didn't move at first, just stared at me, and for a second, I thought he might pull away again. But then, after a long moment, he stood up, stretching his body slowly, as though testing the waters. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress, even if it felt small. I clipped the leash to his collar and opened the door. As we stepped outside, I tried not to think about the last time we'd been out here. The panic, the fear, the chaos. Today, I was going to keep it simple. No distractions. Just me and him, moving forward, one step at a time. The streets were quiet again, the early morning calm hanging in the air. But even with the peace around us, I could feel the tension in the air between us. Every step Rex took seemed measured, careful, like he was still uncertain. He wasn't pulling ahead the way he used to. He wasn't running beside me like he used to. It was almost like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something to happen. I stayed calm, forcing myself to take slow, steady steps. I didn't push him to walk faster. Instead, I let him set the pace. Every few minutes, I'd glance down at him, trying to gauge how he was feeling, but his eyes were always looking ahead, focused but distant. "Rex," I called softly, stopping for a moment and crouching down to his level. "Are you okay, buddy? You know I'm here, right? You don't have to be afraid." I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening, but I didn't let it show. Rex looked at me, but he didn't respond. He just kept walking, slowly, cautiously. I wasn't sure if he was hearing me, if he was really listening, but I had to believe he was. I had to believe we were moving forward, even if it was only a fraction of an inch at a time. We walked for a few blocks, and the tension between us started to lift, ever so slightly. But as we turned onto a quieter road, something changed. A car, an old sedan, came rushing around the corner. The driver wasn't speeding, but it was the kind of car that came too fast, too unexpectedly. I didn't see it coming. Rex froze again. His body tensed up, his ears shot up, and before I could even react, he bolted. "Rex!" I shouted, reaching out as if I could stop him by sheer force of will. But he was already halfway down the block. I ran after him, panic rising once more.
No.
Not again. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow as I ran faster. I couldn't let him get away again. This time, Though, something was different. He wasn't running in terror like before. He wasn't panicked. He was moving with purpose, but there was a look in his eyes, like he was testing me. He was looking back at me, glancing over his shoulder as if to see if I was still there. Was he waiting for me to catch up? Or was he hoping I would back off? I didn't know what was going on inside his head, but I wasn't going to give up. Rex. I shouted again, my voice hoarse with urgency. Come back. This time, I stayed a few steps behind him. I didn't chase him. Instead, I slowed myself down, calling his name in a calm, even voice. I had to prove to him that I wouldn't give up, that I could still be the person he needed, that we could do this together, step by step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rex stopped. He looked back at me one last time before he sat down, his body still trembling, but he was no longer running. I slowed my pace, letting out a shaky breath as I walked toward him, my heart in my throat. It's okay, Rex. It's okay, I whispered as I reached him, kneeling down slowly. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. For the first time in what felt like forever, he just looked at me, eyes softening just a little. And I realized right then that maybe this was the turning point. Not because it was over, but because it wasn't. We weren't done. Not by a long shot. But we had both taken another step forward, even if we didn't know what was ahead. We were still fighting, and that, in itself, was a victory.